Welcome back to the Jerusalem Science Contest. This week we are going to be looking at Chapter 15, Life Near the Surface, which is the epipelagic region of the ocean. And this is that's Chapter 15, and this, I believe, is our 10th lecture. So what I'd like to talk to you about today, before I even do that, I want to thank my friend and colleague, Noah Goldman, for actually preparing a bunch of slides for me so that I'm able to make this talk for you. Noah was kind enough to put all the slides up on the smartboard behind me, so that greatly facilitates my being able to talk to you about some of the chemical compounds that I want to mention today. But anyway, what I'd like to talk to you about actually has to do with what we sometimes refer to as the red tide. And the red tide, of course, is frequently we see this. It's actually from a proliferation of either dinoflagellates or, in some cases, cyanobacteria. And I'll be talking to you about what happens when the particular kinds of dinoflagellates and cyanobacteria proliferate, that is, grow in great numbers, and the effect that can have not only on surrounding marine life, but the effect it can also have on human beings that might happen to eat something that came from these contaminated waters. So in terms of how the red tides themselves form, there are actually 4 stages of red tide. So the first one is the introduction of that particular plankton into the area where the red tide is going to occur. And sometimes this happens because ships will sometimes take up water as ballast, and then they can eliminate that water, so they go from one port to another one. So if a ship happens to pick up water where some of these microorganisms happen to be located, and then it deposits that water, eliminates its ballast in another port where conditions are much more favorable. There might be more micronutrients there, and it's much more favorable for growth of the cyanobacteria or dinoflagellates, then you can get a bloom occurring. So the next stage would be that growth stage, where the population begins to multiply, and this can occur rapidly and perhaps over a few weeks of time span. And then the third stage is a maintenance stage. Here, one of two things can happen: either the organisms can continue to live offshore, or they can be moved inshore by tides or strong winds. So these things can actually blow the organisms closer to shore, or they may just continue to maintain that growth pattern offshore. And finally, if the organisms move inshore, usually there's more nutrients there, and that's much more likely for them to continue to grow, and so the bloom may become even larger. And then finally, the last part of this cycle is that the bloom eventually is going to dissipate. The organisms will start to die, and that will end the cycle, but it can be repeated a number of times. So red tides are not always red. That's another thing that we learn. The organisms that cause red tides, very frequently these might be dinoflagellates that can be extremely fragile. When they're broken up as they get closer to the shore, they hit rough surfaces, or sometimes it's just the tide itself is sufficiently strong that can actually rupture the cells of these organisms, and they will release their cellular contents, including a number of toxins, but also the chemical components that are actually coloring the water. So sometimes it's colored red, sometimes it's colored green, but for historical purposes, these things are usually referred to as red tides. Okay, so what I want to talk to you about specifically are some of the organisms that actually cause these kinds of outbreaks, these red tide outbreaks. And as I said before, they tend to be either cyanobacteria in some cases, and in other cases they're dinoflagellates. But not all cyanobacteria produce red tides, and not all red tides are toxic. When we talk about red tides, not just because there is a proliferation of the organism doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a toxic outbreak. And a good example of this would be if we looked even at, and we've already looked at these things before, some of the dinoflagellates, for instance, that are caused, that actually cause these bioluminescent bays to form. So we've seen that you can have, really that's a proliferation of the dinoflagellates, and nevertheless it's completely safe to swim in those waters, and those organisms are not toxic whatsoever. So it's only certain organisms that we really have to worry about, and I'm mostly going to address those organisms that are actually problematic for human health, because many of these toxins, when they get into the water, will kill nearly everything, and then it's a question of what doesn't it kill that actually human beings would eat. And for the most part, these things tend to be shellfish. So I'm going to talk about a number of kinds of shellfish poisons. I mean, fortunately from Jews, we don't have to worry about these kinds of things, because we don't eat these creatures. And this is one of the other things that Hashem gave us, is a law that prevents us from eating these things, which is actually helping us in terms of our health, because many of these things can be extremely, if you don't die after you eat them, you can actually have symptoms that will linger on for a very, very long period of time. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the specific kinds of chemical compounds that actually cause, and some of the things that are actually, some of the conditions that we actually get, that are actually produced by ingesting some of these particular toxins. So there's one form of toxin, which is actually up on the board. It's called domoic acid, and this is the, let me see if I can turn the light out here. So ingesting shellfish, and these are mostly clams and mussels that are actually contaminated with domoic acid, causes vomiting, headaches, diarrhea, and memory loss. So these things, this is referred to as amnesic shellfish poisoning. So, and this particular compound, domoic acid, is has this, you'll notice there's a 5-membered ring in here with a nitrogen. This is called a pyrrolidine, and compounds of that type frequently have toxicity. So this is domoic acid. That's the first one I want to show you. And then on the next slide, I'm going to show you a couple different kinds of compounds. I try to group these things, and these are, by no means are these the only toxic agents that are produced by these things, but these are some of the more common ones. So let me go to the next slide. And on this slide, I've got, I'm showing you compounds called brevetoxin A. There's a number of these, but brevetoxin A is a common one. Gymnosin A, and another compound called ciguatoxin. So first I want to address brevetoxin. So brevetoxin, this produces something called neurotoxic shellfish poisoning. Now this compound, all these compounds here are what we would call polyethers. If you notice, you'll notice that there's carbon bonded to oxygen. You have this repeating over and over again. Now this is a cyclic polyether. This particular ring right here is a tetrahydropyrane, and you see that repeating over and over and over again. And it's in a lot of these structures. Sometimes it's a 6-membered ring. In this particular case, we've got a 7-membered ring. There's another 7-membered ring here, and in brevetoxin we even have an 8-membered ring. But they all have this ether, which is an oxygen between 2 carbon atoms. They all have the ether, and it's repeating over and over again. So these are polyethers. So I grouped all of these compounds together because there is that structural similarity between them. But the brevetoxin A and the ciguatoxin actually produce different kinds of conditions. So brevetoxin A causes tingling of the limbs, muscle spasms, dizziness. You would get this from eating, you would not get it, but a person would get it by eating clams, scallops, mussels, and oysters that were actually contaminated by these organisms. Now, it's actually caused, the organism that actually causes this is something called Carenia brevis. That's where the brevetoxin comes from. And again, I said this is neurotoxic shellfish poisoning. Now, these compounds are sodium channel blockers, so they actually are preventing the nerve impulse from taking place by preventing sodium from being able to move through the cell membrane. So this all these things operate in basically the same way. But this next one over here, the ciguatoxin, I want to talk a little bit about that. This is caused by a dinoflagellate called Gambierdiscus toxicus. And this causes something called ciguatera fish poisoning. Now this is a pretty bad one because something on the order of 20,000 people a year, mostly in the tropics and then in the subtropics, are affected by eating fish that actually have ingested this organism. It didn't kill the fish outright, because you're not going to be eating no one's going to serve you a fish that they found floating in the water. At least you would hope that wouldn't be the case. But these are fish that have actually ingested the toxic organism. It may kill the fish at a later point in time, but it can cause, it can kill human beings, and it also, if it doesn't kill you, it's going to make you very, very uncomfortable. And again, it's the sort of thing that is a very, very it's important because of the large number of people that are actually ingest this toxin every year, and people have died from it. There have been mass poisonings that have occurred. Okay, the next slide I want to show you